Hey YouTube, it's your girl Dr. J, and I thought I would come and do a quick video on learning styles. And I am actually a big believer that you should not only cater to your child's primary learning style, but you should make sure that you intentionally implement a lot of different learning styles into your lesson planning, especially when you have multiple children, but even for one child. And the reason I think is because it really allows for a more deep learning of the material, and it also allows there to be variety, and it just helps your child to really kind of embrace the learning experience, as opposed to thinking that learning only happens in a book, even when it's some of our more kind of basic and routine types of learning that we're going to be doing. The concept of learning styles really grew out of Gardner's work on multiple intelligences, where he said that there were, these primary intelligences that we can track, and intelligence wasn't really just based on IQ or that kind of mathematical, logical intelligence, but there were a lot of different types of intelligence, musical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, that sort of thing. And while Gardner, it wasn't completely embraced in the educational community that there were a lot of different types of intelligence. What came out of that was the kind of grasping onto the concept that there was different ways of learning. And so while we still tend to measure intelligence based on that logical mathematical equation, we do recognize that there are a lot of ways that kids can learn and kids can grow, and even us as adults, there's a lot of different ways that we can learn and grow. So what I'm going to do is go over the various types of learning styles that have been identified, how they differ from Gardner's model, and then how I use it just in something simple like basic mathematics. So the learning styles as they are established today are visual, spatial, and that's basically people who like pictures, who want to see the picture in front of them. Auditory, which is people who like to hear it. That's like sound, musical, that sort of thing. They learn by hearing. We have linguistic, which is learning by the use of words, whether it's reading or speaking, but they learn by words, which is a little bit different. Like sometimes you'll hear linguistic referred to as visual verbal, and that's when people are going to be talking about reading it in a book. But it's different, even though it's word based, it's different from auditory, because with auditory it's not just about the words, it can be learning by sound or rhythm, as opposed to with linguistic it's the actual words that bring forth the learning. Kinesthetic, and that's just learning by your body or moving or getting the information through the use of your body. Then it's logical mathematical, and logical mathematical is just getting it by process, getting information by going through a logical step-by-step process, something that tends to be rule-based. Even we see this even with phonics, where some kids they don't want to learn the sounds per se, but if you can help them understand the phonetic rules and the spelling rules, that's how they learn. So that's that logical mathematical. Social, that's really learning by groups. I don't know if you have a child, or even if you are one where you get your learning from really debate or just bouncing ideas back and forth with people, or through conversation or working with others, and that's social. And then there's solitary. Sometimes we just have to be by ourselves and kind of wrestle with the information ourselves, as opposed to being out there and doing it socially. It's just having time set aside to work it out on your own. So those are the basic learning styles. A lot of times what we hear about are just those first ones: visual, spatial, auditory, linguistic, kinesthetic, and logical, mathematical. We don't hear a lot about social and solitary, but a lot of times we'll see it implemented, especially in the traditional classroom, where they'll have group work. Now, how that differed from Gardner's model is that Gardner had his model, and I actually wrote them down to make sure that I didn't miss any, and I don't have my sheet, so I'm just going to have to go on memory. But Gardner had some different ones, like for auditory, he had simply a musical. He specifically pointed out as musical. He also had a one intelligence that was like naturalistic, or being out there in nature, or seeing things in their correct environment and learning that way, learning through context, learning through having things being where they should be. So instead of a child, reading about a tree or making a model of a tree or drawing a tree or hearing a song about a tree, that child is going to learn better by actually being out there and seeing the tree in its natural habitat and observing it in its natural setting. This is like the concept of like real world based math. Like if you put math in the context of its natural setting, the child will understand it better. And then he also later added an existential intelligence, and it became known as like a spiritual intelligence. And he wasn't ready to talk about there being like a spiritual intelligence, but a lot of times we see that in people who homeschool, and they may have like a Bible-based homeschool, or a homeschool where their religion is a big driving factor for a lot of the things that they do. We see this where you might have a Christian-based science, or something like that, or using the Bible as your writing text and stuff. And it's this that the child can learn from that spiritual context in which they are framing their world. So those are the ways that Gardner's intelligences differ from learning style. And the big thing, one of the biggest differences, is that multiple intelligence is that's how you manifest your learning, whereas learning style is that's how you get the learning. So it's a manifestation of intelligence versus a getting of information. So what I'm going to focus on is the getting of information, and really showing how you can use those multiple intelligences when you're designing your lesson plans for your kids. And so when we look at visual, spatial, or picture, if you have a child that likes to see pictures, and we oftentimes call that being right brain, we have things like this. Like this is like the right brain child, and that's just really where you have a picture. Like sometimes when kids are reversing letters and things like that, they don't have the correct picture of the letter. So this book shows, like, showing the child, a 3, think of a camel, on its side, and that's a 3. And for a 4, think of, a chair that's upside down. So it's having them picture the numbers and picture the, picture addition as houses, sort of thing. So that's that visual. Another example of visual is math art, or having kids do projects where they create pictures of the concepts that they're working on, as opposed to just writing words or even just writing numbers, but really visualize the experience. Auditory, that's like a lot of times people will use songs. This is musical mathematics, skip counting, but it's basically using music to get the learning in there, because sometimes even if you give the same information but you do it to a rhythm and a beat, that really helps children kind of internalize that information, and it really helps with recall. I'm telling you, there are so many people where if you ask them how a bill becomes a law, as long as they got the rhythm to Schoolhouse Rock, they can tell you exactly the process. But if you just ask them to write it, they might not be able to do that. So linguistic is going to be, what we traditionally see in our workbooks, like this is Singapore math, or definitely things like Life of Fred, when it is a kind of a more language-based or language arts-based math program. Kinesthetic, that's where, the kids are going to be able to manipulate the things that they do, use their body a little bit more. This is fine motor skill, manipulation of fine motor skill, kinesthetic. But I showed you guys like my number line that I have my kids do, where they have to walk up and down a number line, or go on a scavenger hunt to find answers to multiplication problems and different things like that. But that's using the body. We know that the body does have muscle memory, and sometimes just doing it and experiencing it is just what's needed for children. Logical, mathematical, that's really just going in there and just working through. So when you come to logical, mathematical, that's when you're actually going to be doing the problems in the book. That's when you're going to do that traditional, what's the rules? What's the rules? Like, okay, the rule to addition is that the numbers can be in any order, whereas the rule to subtraction is that the order of numbers matter. So teaching those rules that govern how that math takes place. For social, that's where you have things like games. This is a game that my kids really like. Trifecta. This is addition and subtraction, and we have multiplication and division. But playing a game, with your siblings or working things out, even if you just have one child, if you sit down and play like a math game with that child or a card game or something like that, that's that social aspect, or learning in a social setting. Also, group projects or giving them a tough problem and having them figure out that problem. And then solitary is just, kind of giving them an experience, something to do and walking away. A lot of times, if you have a computer-based program, a lot of times they will expect the child to be working by themselves and to be working through the problems by themselves. And sometimes I think that's the one that's neglected a little bit the most sometimes, especially in the early years, where we think, oh, I have to be there with my child to help my child, through the process, or help my child learn the steps. But all children should be learning how to work things through kind of on their own, as well as in a group. So having kind of that one-on-one time to kind of process all the information that you're working through and have your own understanding of it. And the big thing is that also none of these learning styles have to be in isolation. Kinesthetic and visual and auditory can all be happening at the same time. So it's not that, this one activity is, because even like this game, even though it's social, it's also auditory because you're going to be talking through things. It's also visual because the kids will be visually be looking at the board game. It's also kinesthetic because you have to, move the pieces around and that sort of thing. So it's not that there's just this one aspect. You can combine the different learning styles in, a number of different ways. The big thing is to kind of think back and say, have I hit all these different points? It really creates more fun and repetition, because it's no fun doing, 5 or 6, 7, 8 pages in a workbook at one time. But doing 1 or 2 pages in a workbook and then playing a game and then watching a video or singing some songs, and that you will probably get the same amount of repetition, if not more repetition, but it didn't feel like repetition to your child or you, and it really makes the learning a little bit more deep. So wanted to bring that out there. I may do some, if people like this, I may do some videos on how you can do this same kind of learning style approach to a lot of different topics and subjects. So if you like it, if you want me to do some showing some different subjects and topics, go ahead and put it in the comments box and I'll work on those. But I thought I would just kind of put this out there as a little snippet on different learning styles, and a little bit on Gardner's multiples intelligences. So this is Dr. J. I hope this helps, and I'm out. Bye-bye.